So when you're creating dynamic, good-looking grass, it's surprisingly easy. So let's go ahead and start. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of this default cube because you don't actually need a cube. What I do need, and I'm going to hit Shift A for our add, and I'm going to add a plane here. Now, that's pretty much all of the modeling that you really need to do. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and create my dynamic object. So I come over here to my panel, and I'm going to select the particle properties tab. I'm going to hit the plus to go ahead and add a particle property. And just for right now, to keep everything straight, I'm going to call this grass main. This way I'll be able to tell what it is when I make more than one of these, because we're going to do that in the future. All right, so we have our particle property, and the next thing I want to do is make this a hair particle. Grass is a lot like hair in the way it behaves, in the way that we want it to behave. So right now we don't need 1,000 particles. We're going to do this with 100 particles, and we're going to have a lot more than 100 particles. We're going to increase that with something called children that you'll see in a moment. But we're going to go ahead and decrease this number to 100, and like you can see, that decreased the total number of strands we had here. Now what we are going to do also is decrease the length quite a bit. So we're going to do this so it's roughly to scale. So I'm going to choose 3 inches. And the cool thing about Blender is that I can go ahead and put inches in. I can say 3 and then IN, and it will convert that to meters. So if you're not from the United States, that's about 0.0762. I said about, but that's the actual number, 0.0762 meters. If you know what grass height you would like to put in meters, that's perfectly fine, or put in centimeters for that matter. So right now we have the grass length the way we want it. We're going to leave the seed the same. That's how the grass is kind of situated because it uses a random number generator. We're going to leave the segments to 5. I find that anything less or more than that kind of acts funny when we're changing things around. So the next thing we want to do is add the hair dynamic. So this is kind of how the physics of the hair behaves. So I'm going to give that a check. I'm going to leave the quality steps at 5. The more you increase this, the more computing power it's going to take. Pin gold strength has to do with the stiffness, but it's not completely straightforward. But we do care about the structural physics of what we're looking at. So we do care about it, and this is the structural kind of dynamics of the grass that we're looking at. So vertex mass, which is like how heavy the grass is, right now it's set to 0.3, and for grass, that's way too heavy. So we're going to set this to 0.01 kg, and that's going to make the grass less heavy. Under 0.3, it would probably fall down under its own weight. The next thing we're going to do is the stiffness. You can think of this as how easy the grass will bend. So the stiffness right now, like before, it's a little bit too high. So we're going to actually decrease it by 10, by a factor of 10, actually by a order of magnitude down. So 0.05, and then random, which is how much these different characteristics can shift by within all of the strands that are on there. We're going to change that to 0.147. And now I just find that this gives us the correct amount of variability to give us what looks like realistic grass. And then damping, we're going ahead and leaving at 0.5. So if you think of when a spring moves or something oscillates, it kind of loses energy or eventually it stops moving. And that's what damping is. And 0.5 will work fine with 0.5 will work fine for what we're trying to do. The next thing we want to do is work with the children. So the children in this case, when you're talking about the particle generator, is based on these like parent particles here. So the children behave like the parents behave. So the children will take on the movement and the dynamics that the parent take on. So if we change this to interpolated, because that's going to give us the best outcome, and now you can see that there are many more particles. So we said 100 before, and in the display we have this set to 10. So that means there's 100 times 10, which gives us 1,000. Now, this is some pretty crappy looking grass if we actually had this, because it's not enough grass. But when we actually do the render, we don't actually get the 10, we get the render amount, which is 100. So we get 100 times 100, which is about 10,000, I think. So the reason that we do that is that many particles could slow down the computer, so it would be harder for us to render. So right now we do this at a display amount of 10, it'll render at 10 times that, so 1,000 times 100. Sorry, it's 1,000 times 100. So let's see, go ahead and see what that is. 1,000 times 100, and that gives us 10,000, like what I said. So turns out I did my math correct. Now that's all set up. We want it to be the same length. We're leaving the threshold the same. The next thing we want to do is what we call the clump noise. So one of the reasons that grass in a simulation, which is what this is in Blender, would look unrealistic is because everything is the same. So we don't want everything to be the complete same. And one of the ways we can do that is by changing the clumping. So if we go under children, we go to clumping, we see that we have these here that we can change. So if I change the clumping, you can see that the grass will tend to kind of come together. And one direction, the negative direction, brings the bottoms together, and the positive direction brings the tops together. So we actually want to bring the tops together for this, so we're going to put a positive number, 0.064, and that just gives us some variability. Now if you look at this, you can see that it's starting to look a lot less regular, which is what we're going for. The shape we're going to keep the way it is, and the next thing we're going to do is change the comp noise, because we don't want everything to be completely uniform. Complete uniformity is kind of the enemy of realism. So the next thing is the clump noise. We're going to decrease, we're going to put, sorry, not decrease the clump noise, we're going to add some clump noise. And the clump noise is going to be 0.064. That's the clump noise. Oh, actually, the clumping itself, we're going to put that at 0.264. So the clumping is 0.264, and the clump noise is 0.064. The next thing we do is the roughness. Now the roughness is going to give us our final amount of randomness that we're looking for here. So if we go to roughness, and under roughness we're going to go to random, because that's what we're using this for. And we're going to go use 0.076 for random. And now you can kind of see how everything looks really scraggly. And that gave us the difference between having these completely straight strands, which is kind of unrealistic, and gave us some bent strands. So this now looks a lot better. It looks a lot messier to you, but in actuality, it's a lot more realistic. So just to give us an idea of what that looks like, let's go ahead and set up some of our camera and everything. So in order to do that, I'm going to hit 0 to go into camera mode. I'm going to open my side panel, which you can get to by hitting N, and I'm going to go to view, and under view I'm going to say lock camera to view. So now if I move my view, the camera will stay the same. So I want this to be roughly in the center. I'm going to switch to rendered mode just so I can see if I can try to pick up the best angle here, and this is the angle that I'm going to keep. I'm going to unclick, lock camera to view, and I'm going to change our light. Right now our light is set up to be a point light. So I'll left click on the light. I'm going to click the light setting. I can only get to this after this is selected, and you know it's selected because it's orange. I'm going to change this to the sun. It's already pointed directly at it, and you can see it's super bright. And that's because it's really high. It's set at 1,000. So right now I'm going to decrease that to 10. And that's going to give us something a little bit more realistic. I'm going to come out of render mode. I'm going to hit numpad 0 to take us into the render view or camera view mode. And now I'm going to hit. So this is what our environment currently looks like. And it looks a little bit, how should we say, messy, but it's kind of giving us what we're looking for. It doesn't quite have enough grass particles. So one thing we can do is we can go to the children, which are up here, and it's set at 10 and 100, and we can go ahead and increase that just to give us an idea of what more particles would look like. So we increase this to 1,000, and then I hit the same F12 to give us a render, and we can see that it looks a lot more realistic with this grass. But actually, the clumping looks a bit too much. So what we could do is go to our clumping, and then we could reduce that rate. So reducing it to 0.1, we hit F12 to do it again, and you can see that there's far less clumping. So we haven't done the materials for this yet, but honestly, if you wanted to stop here and do the materials, you certainly could. We're going to do some things to make it look even more realistic. But this is right here enough to give you some realistic looking grass once you add material.